And we're live. Hey, I wanted to wait till Shannon was done with her stream, but I was like over 2 hours, and I didn't want to be up too late tonight. So if you want to go like watch Shannon's stuff, if you're watching hers, please stay over there. I love when people watch her stuff, but she has a good cause tonight, and I really don't want to step on her stream. But I wanted to have a discussion tonight with philosopher Nicholas Lamar Soutter. He's been on the Non Sequitur show before. He has a couple books out. The links are in the video description: The Water Thief and the Humanist Codex, and Confession of a Sin Eater. You have like 3 things, don't you?
Yep.
Yeah, prolific. So we've been trying to get together for a while to have an actual conversation about philosophy, and I was trying to think of something we could actually kind of discuss, right, and maybe enjoy for people to listen to. And I think we're kind of on the same page of what we maybe going to come up with. We both are on Twitter, and we both see a lot of the vitriol between atheist and theist. But I was wondering kind of like why we see the same vitriol more towards, well, not the same vitriol, but the same. Let me rephrase it. We see vitriol from both sides, but we see more vitriol from atheists when it comes to philosophy than we do theists. Theists tend to seem to be more accepting of philosophy than atheists. And in my personal experience, I get a lot of flack, I get a lot of feedback, and a lot of pushback for holding the positions that I do. Obviously, as an agnostic, I'm not really fitting into the atheist narrative. I completely disagree with the way American atheists promote atheism and way the atheist experience do. I mean, they're entitled to it, but I have my own positions. I mean, I actually read the philosophical literature, so I kind of wanted to bring you on board and ask you, do you see some of the same things? Do you see theists tends to kind of gravitate more to philosophy more? And do you think that's because they need it more to demonstrate in their minds that there's a deity, or you just think that atheists don't want to bother with that kind of critical thinking? Because I'm trying to raise the level across the board. I want atheists to be better at critical thinking. I want them to understand the arguments, because I've talked to a lot of people, and I got to tell you, with some exceptions. Obviously, I love Paul G and Shannon and those guys, but there's on the other end of the spectrum of atheists, I've never seen so many bad arguments and so many lack of critical thinking and so much dogma in the atheist community than in maybe 5 years ago there was like that. And I see it just coming back. So I wanted to get your impression on it. And by the way, introduce yourself if people don't remember from the Non Sequitur show, but it's good to get you back on air, because we had that one time we talked and then just couldn't get a hold of you again.
I know, and I apologize. You offered several times, and it just didn't work out. So thank you for having me back. I think you did a spectacular introduction of me. I don't think there's much more to add, and I'm easy enough to find on the internet and on Twitter. You brought up a number of excellent points, and I think I couldn't agree more about raising the level of discourse for so many reasons. Some of them really quite selfish. I personally believe that I'm on the right side of the debate on this, which is the atheist side. And as the person on the right side of the debate, if I would like to win that debate, that means I really kind of have to step up my game. And that means I want the people on my side to step up their game too. So that's a very selfish reason as well, that I would like to see that happen. I used to think that the difference between atheists and theists was rational and not rational, and that the gulf between us was the Grand Canyon, and that almost as in the difference in one species and another. And really it didn't take a lot of time, and especially recently I've seen that gulf just get narrower and narrower and narrower, and it very much in the way that you're describing, and it's sort of where what I see now as a difference much more akin to hair color or eye color. When I see the difference between an atheist and a theist, it's much smaller. And I've seen atheists acting so unbelievably irrationally and holding to such dogma themselves. I'll give actually one example. And this is jumping actually way ahead of where maybe I would have wanted to go, but I think it's an appropriate example. Sometimes I think it's phenomenally difficult for theists to deconvert, and I think it's asking a lot in a lot of cases. And I think a lot of atheists do not recognize that. And I think that's unfortunate. And I think that's actually dogmatic too. I think there's this sense of superiority. Well, it was easy for me. I'm just better. Well, I don't think that's true in any sense. And even if it were, a better person would sit there and say, well, let me give you a hand. How can I help? It's not about me bullying you into, realizing this position. So it really isn't easy. Now, Hitchens, I'm a huge fan of Hitchens, believe it or not. But Hitchens had made a claim, and we have this on the Codex. We have the interview where he did this, and people quote it to me all the time as if I don't know it, where he had said he can't fathom how people could say that they miss their belief, like as if a phantom limb. He doesn't understand that at all. Well, I ask theists or atheists sometimes to imagine a God that they would want to see. The number of atheists that balk at this and say either they can't do it or outright refuse to do it. This is a philosophical exercise.
Sure.
This is a philosophical exercise. The number of atheists who sit there and ask a theist, can you imagine if there was no God? And then when the theist says, that's kind of hard, I don't even know if I want to. And I say, well, just try. An atheist thinks nothing of asking a theist to imagine no God. Now I say, okay, just try imagining a God you would want. And they're like, oh no, I can't do it. As if the idea is toxic, as if they'll get it on them and they won't be able to get it off. They're terrified of the idea. And then they say, well, no, I really can't do it. There's no such thing. You have to suffer such a want of imagination to not be able to imagine a God you'd want. And think about that for 1 second, because I get so much pushback on this. And a lot of atheists come back, oh my God, well, I wouldn't want to be a slave. Well, wait a minute. Every God that anybody ever believed in was the God of their choosing and the one that they wanted and that they imagined themselves. For the most part, right? So when I say the God that you would imagine, it doesn't have to be a Christian God. It can be a pantheistic, whatever you want. Imagine the limit is your imagination. Sit down and think about it. Take 10 days, take 15 days. If you can't come up with one that you'd say, yeah, I'd want that. And people say, well, I can't imagine one that would make up for all the terrible suffering here. You're missing.
Yeah, there's definitely a hypocrisy in that regard. Yeah. I definitely agree with you, but I'll even take it one step further. And yes, we're going far down the line. I thought we were going to do it incrementally.
Yeah, we jumped. Oh my God!
Jumping, but that's okay. I don't mind. My audience is really smart. They're going to catch up. Trust me. But not only that. What I've seen recently is this whole promotion of this agnostic approach that I've had people that kind of even tell me what the concept of God means, and they think it's some kind of defeater, and they I don't know if they're sincere about it or not. I really can't tell. And I'm not trying to be judgmental of them. I'm not saying that it's an argumentative motive, but I got to tell you, if somebody comes up to me and says, hey, well, I don't even know what they mean by God. God, tell me what you mean by God. And you give them some working thing and they're like, well, I don't even know what you mean by that. Okay, then at that point, the conversation is not going to go anywhere. There's been thousands of years of dialogue. If you cannot find a concept of God that works for you, then why are you in any of these conversations? You're like molasses in the gears of philosophy. You're not doing anything to add. You're not adding any dialogue. You're not even a decent interlocutor at that point. You add nothing. So I keep asking them, take the time, go read something, go find a concept that works for you, and then come back, because I don't want to go back 2,000 years of dialogue. I don't want to go 5 steps back to try to get you to a God concept just so we can have something to talk about when it comes to theism or atheism or agnosticism. It's so far back to square one, and yet I see a lot of atheists try to do it, and even then they're like, "Well, I'm not atheist. I'm an ichtheist." Okay, do you really know what the term means? Because I don't think a lot of them do. But I think it's the same thing that what you're asking them to do. You're asking them to come up with a deity that works for them. Half of them can't even come up with any concept, more or less one that works for them. But I certainly could. I'd be like, yeah, I can imagine a God that gives me, 72 virgins every other day, and I get to eat grapes all day long and drink as much beer as I want. That's a cool deity. I could worship that, sure. I think we all need to learn how to entertain hypotheticals, because that's exactly what they are. They're thought experiments. And if you can't, then that's a little dishonest in your approach. But have you seen those kind of things that atheists kind of do to kind of circumvent the actual difficult questions by just kind of throwing, wrenches in the works and thinking that they're having a really rational conversation? It's just like, no, you're not really being rational. If you really don't understand God talk, that's one thing. But I don't think a lot of them actually have that issue. I think they just use it as a conversation stopper.
Well, I think that's a good example of it. I think the arguments on faith. Listen, for the most part, I try to allow my opposition to define the words as they use them. So, and this gets back to agnosticism. So, you say you're agnostic. You may not use that in a way that I've been used to, but then I say, okay, how do you define it? I try to understand that and understand why. And as long as it's a reasonable use of the word, then I say, okay, boom, got it. So, when atheists tend to force a theist into a use of the word faith that is the worst possible use for the theist and the best for the atheist. And that's intellectually dishonest, I think. And I think that's an example of that tactic. I think that's got a number of downsides for the atheist. But have I disconnected? Can you still hear me? Or
yeah, I can still hear.
Oh, okay. So but I think that's an example of what you're talking about. I think one of the reasons that I very much liked what you said when you were talking about burden of proof is because I think this idea, the second that there is this notion of the atheist is so sure they're right that they don't have to prove, demonstrate, or even bring themselves down to the level of the theist. And I think you make a very good argument for why that's really not even close to true.
Well, that's the Carrier approach, right? Richard Carrier just wrote a blog on that. He read my argument that atheism of any kind requires a burden of proof, and I have good citations on that. I think that's a very strong argument. It's been talked about in atheist communities all over the world. I have not had a defeater for it yet. And everybody who knows about epistemology says, yeah, that's kind of generally the way it is. So I mean, there's something. It's not really even that much of a questionable thing in some regards. I just formulated it in a way that I think most people can understand. But he acknowledges it's a good argument and he agrees with it. But then he says the atheists have already met their burden of proof. Sure, they have one, whether you lack a belief or believe in the positive. But it's already been done. Game over. Theists go home. Now the theists have to do all the work to try to convince the atheist. And that's not how an interlocutor, when they come together, works. It doesn't work that way. You both have a discussion. You both have a position that you want to persuade the other one to. And you can't just say, hey, you know what? My job's done. I've already, all the work's already been done. Go read a Carrier book. No, it doesn't work that way. You have your own burden when you have a discussion with a theist, each and every time.
Well, I think I want to try to bring this back to a bit to where we were closer to the beginning for a minute, because I think so. One of the things we were talking about is in some ways, how is maybe the atheist and the theist sort of much closer together, and how is maybe a recognition of that and recognition of what is the atheist really trying to achieve? What does that look like? Now, every atheist I speak to on Twitter says what they're trying to do is to deconvert other people. Yet, when I try to have an open discussion with other atheists about their methods for doing this, and I say, look, okay, what I find is when people yell at me, I'm not as inclined to listen to them. I say, oh, that's why I never yell at anyone. I say, okay, great. Then why were you just yelling at that person? Oh, well, they weren't going to listen to me anyway. Well, how do you know that? You actually started by yelling. Well, I didn't really start by yelling. Well, it looked to me like you did. No, I didn't. And, I've had this discussion just dozens and dozens of times. And, what I've found is it seems to me that a lot of atheists on Twitter, and this certainly isn't, by the way, all of them. And I don't want to.
Yeah, we're not generalizing all of them. It's a unique small group, right?
But a lot of things that I've noticed is that a number of, and this also, and you have to realize we're also talking about atheists on Twitter. So this is also a subset of the whole atheist community. So there's atheists, There's atheists on Twitter who have their own agenda, and then there's a subset of the atheists on Twitter. And I've met atheists on Twitter who are phenomenally patient and who have realized that this patience is how they're going to get from A to Z. But I've had a few atheists who, when I get into this discussion too, sit there and say, well, I've deconverted 3 people, 4 people, 5 people. How many have you deconverted, Nick? And I usually sit there and say, I haven't a clue. I don't know. I'm in it for the long haul, and I usually can't measure in terms of 1, 2, 3, because by the time, if I ever get to someone who says, wow, I'm really not sure anymore, I'm at the end of a process that got started by 16 people long before I got there. And usually when I talk to someone, I think of it in terms of starting a process. I don't see this as, I think a lot of atheists on Twitter see this as I'm going to come up with the one argument that's going to change this person's mind right now. And if it doesn't work, then they start to get very hostile. They start to get very upset. And, you get into this huge confrontational thing. Now there's one guy, Daryl Davis. I love this guy. Daryl Davis, look him up. He collects KKK robes, Klansman robes. He's got the first robe he ever collected was from a grand wizard of the KKK. The big thing about him, of course, is he's black. And he collects them by having them willingly turn them over to him. Now, he befriended a member.
Yeah, I heard that story, yes.
Yeah, and he doesn't do this by getting into fights with them. And he doesn't do this. And if there's any 2 people who could possibly disagree more, and if you take a look at how he did it, and if you take a look at how, and I really think, and this is something I talk about on the Codex, and this is something that the more I look at, the more I have come firmly to believe, that atheism is a civil rights issue. And when you take a look at, we are the most despised minority in the country. There are 6 states in this country in which it is legal to, well, actually in which the constitution of those states' constitution bars atheists from actually holding office.
I don't know if I would agree with that as an aggregate, though. I don't know if I would agree with that as an aggregate. Now, maybe in certain areas, but if you take the United States as a whole, I'm not convinced that atheists are the most despised. I see a lot of vitriol more toward Catholics nowadays than atheists. Now, in certain groups, yes, and I mean the
Pew Research, and we carry all those polls on the Codex. Pew Research of the last 15 years, 8 of them. We beat Muslims.
Yeah, no, I know
Muslims
there's
was the second.
Studies on that. Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with the studies, but it's there are, it depends on your locality.
Yeah, Catholics are catching up.
Yeah, they're catching up pretty fast. Yeah. But as you were saying,
they are.
Yeah.
But I up until Obama made it illegal to fire me as a teacher, because I was teaching high school for a while, I couldn't let anyone know I was an atheist.
Yeah.
The number of people who do not want an atheist, and I ask people, and I say, truthfully, think about this: who's going to be elected first, a Muslim president or an atheist president? And most people think about that, and they say, yeah, I think we'll probably elect a Muslim president first. So I take a look at this, and I think most people, when they talk about, now there's a war on Christmas, as everybody knows, and I think when we try to look at the severe distrust, and actually I suppose I probably did misspeak. The Pew study was, if I recall correctly, actually, and you know what, I did misspeak, because the Pew study found that atheists were there were 2 studies, and one of them was that atheists were trusted about as much as child molesters. Now, that's an issue. Now, I don't think that atheists have a problem anywhere near as bad as the problem that blacks have had in this country. So I'm not trying to equate this issue in terms of severity anywhere near that, because it's not. But it is a similar issue to the civil rights issue, in my opinion. And the solution to it is the same as well. It is trying to find a way to connect with theists and say, this is how I view things and why I view things this way. And it is also trying to attempt to get them to see it your way too. That's why on my wall I have two photos. One is Christopher Hitchens, and everyone's like, how can you say these things and have Christopher Hitchens? There's reasons for that. The second is Martin Luther King Jr. And so I talk about Daryl Davis, and I talk about other methods of trying to get it so that you can understand people, which is why, and then this is where in this conversation, I would bring up okay, you're trying to talk somebody out of what they understand is the source of just about everything. I used to be a theist. That's another reason why it's at least a bit easier for me to sit here and understand what the loss is. And for atheists to so casually dismiss the damage that this inflicts on a human being. Now, that's not to say that it's not important or not worthwhile. And I think that the damage inflicted, I personally think that what is most likely to be the end of our species is religion. I have no doubt in my mind. If you want to talk about, now this is a corollary study, this isn't a causal study, but if you want to look at what's most likely to predict who's going to deny global warming, a condition that is quite possibly going to end our species, the number one predictor of who denies global warming and thus who is preventing us from doing something about it is the level of religiosity. So I think this is a problem that needs to be addressed. But addressing it by beating people over the head isn't going to do it. And really typically has never worked. And it doesn't work with me. So why would I expect it to work with other people? Having said that, having said that, well, no,
it's just a lot to unpack here. And so, definitely a lot to unpack. And so I don't want to go too far down the line because every time you say something that's like, okay, I want to kind of like,
well, I can wrap it up. I can wrap it up with, I think, we all believe what we believe, and we all think that entitles us to shortcuts. I believe that, and it takes training. It takes experience, realizing that the shortcuts never help you out in the long run. It takes a lot of things to sort of realize that, this isn't the best way to do it. And there are people on Twitter who already do this better than I do. There are people on Twitter who have no interest in doing this any better. And there are people on Twitter who think that they do this a lot better, but don't. And it's you find Dunn-Kruger amongst atheists as much as anyone else. But I do find it, I get a little more miffed by that level of hypocrisy in atheists than I do in theists, because atheists usually at least claim to know better, and I probably shouldn't, but I do.
No, I mean, I don't think it's wrong for you to have a bias of that. I mean, they are in your camp, and it's not tribalism, but you definitely want to see people that are espousing these views of want to take a higher, position. They think atheists, obviously think that they have the right answer. They think that they're correct, the atheist is wrong, and they want to be the ones that promote scientific facts. They want to be the ones that promote good logical thinking, good critical thinking. And yet I'm finding every day more and more, they're doing just the opposite. I do agree with you that atheism obviously should be normalized. I do agree with you that there's always been a stigma attached to it, that it shouldn't be there. Do I think they're marginalized anywhere near other groups like blacks? No. Or gays? No. But that doesn't matter. This is not intersectionality where it's persecution versus privilege, where just because one group has worse, that doesn't mean that you should neglect other groups. So I do think there's something to be said for that. But you have to look at the goal.
It's easier to hide too. I mean, I can hide it. I could shut up any day and
yeah, because it's your position, right? It's not something you wear externally, right? It's something that's not visual that people can pick up immediately when you walk into a room, right? You have to tell them your position on a deity. But what I find is that it all is goal oriented, right? If your goal is to normalize atheism, okay, I get that, and that's the only single valid excuse I even have for people that argue like atheism as a lack of belief. If they want to normalize atheism, okay, then it's a utility argument. I don't agree with it. I think it backfires. I think it has less utility than other means, but at least you can make some type of rational argument for it. But it depends on your goal. Like my goal is not to deconvert. And somebody in the live chat was saying, Well, how many atheists are out there trying to deconvert? Quite a few, and there's nothing wrong with that if that's what they're trying to do, fully deconverted. Avino, he's a what's it? How do you pronounce that last name? Ariana Avino, great guy. But they're trying to deconvert people. Okay. They have a different set of reasoning by what they're going about to talk to a theist with. When you talk to somebody like a street epistemologist, like Anthony Magnabosco, he's going to have a different approach, right? Because he is trying to deconvert, whether he will be explicit about that or not. That is part of the goal of street epistemology that comes from Peter Boghossian's work. And that was to get rid of religion and to deconvert the theist. I don't have that as an agenda. I'm not beholden by any ideology. I'm not beholden by dogma. I'm not trying to convert people to agnosticism. I'm not deconverting them out of theism. I'm not deconverting them out of atheism. So I like to take a very broad look and have from a very high epistemic vantage point and look down and say, hey, you're being just as hypocritical as this person. Like you said, these both are beliefs, atheism and theism. The people think that they're right. That's fine. Each one has their own burden of justification. That's fine. But when you expect something from the other group that you don't hold to yourself, I'm going to point out the hypocrisy on it. And that's where I get shit on, for oh, Steve, all he does is talk about, agnosticism and rationality and stuff like that. It's like, wait a minute here. You have atheists out there that have large channels. What do they talk about? Oh, atheism. Oh, you have Christians out there. What do they talk about? Oh, Christianity. So it's like, well, yeah, you're going to talk about things that you have a strong belief in, or at least you want to get out to the masses, because it is an uphill climb just to get people to be rational. And I have developed, I think, a very, very good following of very intelligent, articulate people that come in and have discussions. A lot of them weren't ever exposed to philosophy or exposed to any of these things. And a lot of it's new. And they go, holy crap. I never thought about it that way. Holy crap. You know what? Yeah, that is a pretty rational way to think about that. And they're finding out that they're becoming better arguments, better interlocutors. And if their goal is to deconvert the theist, like you said, why would you not want to have better discussions? Why would you not want to know these things, to understand philosophy and call fallacies out better and stuff like that? Go ahead.
No, absolutely. And just as a quick aside, you would ask if anyone was going to argue with you on agnosticism.
I haven't found anybody yet.
Yes, you did.
Who?
Yes, you did.
Dan, that wasn't you. You never said anything.
Yes, I said I would.
Get out. I honestly don't remember you saying anything. I remember a guy named Dan said he would.
Listen, I don't want to, but I said I would.
I will annihilate you, but
I know you will.
Okay. No.
I didn't say I'd win. I said I'd do it. Listen, it's going to take a little. Listen, first of all,
but you agree with me. How would you?
I do agree with you.
Then why would you go against me if you agree with me?
Because I've argued enough to know that there is no such thing as a position that is completely indefensible.
Oh, well,
and because
fine,
I would ask for 2 weeks before we do it, and I would sit down and I would find a way, and I'd make a damn good fight of it.
Yeah, no, but that's
somebody, and so I offered to do it because you couldn't find anyone.
Yeah, I remember that now. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, but I remember. Didn't I say something along the lines of, "Look, I really want to find somebody who actually." Disagree. I'm sure you find. Right?
I offered to do it. I was willing to do it, and I was going to make I was going to do it well.
I'm sure you will. I mean, you're educated in this topic, right? That's why I don't want some fruit on the ground person. I remember a guy, he said he would, and a guy named Scully said he would. But this guy Scully wants to argue about my other argument about rocks being atheist if you use a deductive logical form that I have, and it's a very, very simple logical deduction. And he keeps not understanding that. It doesn't. What a reductio ad absurdum is showing there's a problem. There's an absurdity. There's a category. It shows a problem. And he doesn't get that because it's logically correct. It's valid. And if you accept the premises, it's sound. Sorry, it doesn't give a crap about your understanding of semantics. It's logic. And so I don't want to debate on that, because what is there to debate? It's clearly valid. And if you say that the premises are all true, what does that mean? It's sound. Now I reject the premises.
The reductio. Okay. Yeah. Yep.
You want the reductio? Okay, I'll give you the reductio. Here it is.
No,
Ready?
no. I'm sorry, I had misheard you. So you were doing the reductio ad absurdum. So you were saying it was a deductively valid argument.
Yeah,
but you were doing a yeah. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I don't agree with the premises, but I'm allowed to do that.
You weren't granting. You were just
saying.
Yeah.
But he doesn't understand that. He thinks I'm granting the premises, and I'm like, no, I'm actually showing you what happens if you do grant the premises.
You're just You were doing an ad absurdum. That's all. All right. So the okay. One of the things this brings me to another thing, which is the other thing that a lot of atheists don't seem to understand. And people think that they look at Hitchens. I really loved Hitchens. It's hard not to like him.
Sure, I liked Hitchens too. I didn't agree with him.
They look at him,
but I liked him.
Well, and everybody kind of wants to be him, and everyone kind of thinks they are him on some level or not, myself included, by the way. So I totally get that. Well, and not only is he really good at debating, but here's the other thing. He insulted a lot of people. And he always said this, I hope I never insult anyone on accident. But he meant that actually in a couple of different ways, not the least of which was he never did insult anyone by accident. He knew what he was doing, and he didn't insult soft targets. He never insulted soft targets. So, it looks like he's insulting everybody. No, he's not. If you watched him on television interviews, if you watched him, he insulted Jerry Falwell. He really did a very good job at insulting Jerry Falwell. But Jerry Falwell probably deserved it.
Right.
Yeah. So, when you go on Twitter and you start acting like Hitchens, I'll bet you dollars to donut if Hitchens saw you do that, he'd sit there and call you an idiot.
Hitchens would probably all over me too. I mean, I get visceral on Twitter, but that's my dumpster fire. I tell people, hey, Twitter, if I don't ever get upset on Twitter, people think I get upset. I don't. I really don't. Because
and if you acknowledge that,
it's weird.
But that's
it's weird. I'm telling you, dude. If you use caps, people really think you get pissed off. It's like, do you understand?
Here's my problem.
It's just
I know.
I'm not really pissed off. I think you're an idiot, but I'm not pissed off, kind of thing.
My problem is I'm a writer. I have to use italics. I have to use italics, but there aren't any. So I use caps for italics.
You can use caps.
But everybody thinks it's.
Go use a copy paste generator. Twitter will do italics.
Will come out on Twitter with italics. Will come. You're kidding?
Nope, they will.
Dude, this was so worth 10 times the show for learning that.
I mean, I can do a test right now, but I've done that before.
I didn't even know. I've never seen anyone else do it. Now I know. Sweet. All right. So you had said about no offering no alternative. Listen, people may have liked Hitchens, but nobody in the audience. But you have to realize he knew who his audience was, and it wasn't necessarily the audience of the debate. No theist in the audience of a debate that he was holding looked at that and said, "Yeah, I want to join his side." But that's not what he was trying to do in most debates. And when it was what he was trying to do, he took a different approach. If you're on Twitter and you're trying to deconvert someone, sitting there and taking an approach like Hitchens probably is not going to be successful. And the number of times where I've seen theists, and I will engage, the name of the codex used to be the Atheist Codex. And in fact, it still actually has the domain name, theatheistcodex.com. I actually prefer the name The Atheist Codex, but I had to switch it to the Humanist Codex. And the reason was because I was engaging more atheists than I was theists. And the atheists were all sitting there going, dude, you're an atheist. Why are you engaging me? And I was like, well, because you're screwing up more than the theists right now. And I wanted to chat about it. But if you as an atheist are behaving in a way that a theist is going to think is you're being a real jerk, they're not going to want to switch sides, to put it in a really ham-handed metaphor. And I have seen, and I've even talked to theists who have said, well, I got to tell you, I've been floundering in my faith, but I've taken every atheist I've ever met is such a fucking jerk.
Yeah, and irrational.
There is no way I'm going to join them. I'm going to, become a Protestant.
No, I agree with you.
There's so many other religions to choose from.
Yep.
If you really want to, and I got to tell you, yeah, rational for its own sake is I think not a bad argument. If the people you're joining, if that tribe that you're joining is a tribe of decent human beings, but if they all kind of are acting like jerks, rational for its own sake isn't necessarily a great argument.
Well, let me ask you this. And by the way, I sent you a tweet. Let me know if you got it. And I showed you. You can do it. You can do it italic. Fancy.
I love you, man.
Yeah. So yeah, you can definitely do that.
This is going to totally change. Actually, it's the people who follow me that are going to be so much more appreciative.
Yeah, let me know if it went through for you. I mean, it worked on my end. So let me see if it shows on your end, because it should be. Works. Pretty cool, right?
Bold, yeah. Everything.
Yeah, you just use italic generator.
I've got 4 monitors here, so it's like I'll just have Word up in a thing, and I'll just
yeah, that's it. You just copy paste. I use it every so often when I'm doing like scientific stuff, like words that's supposed to be italicized. I try to use that. But we're gonna get Brian here in 1 second. But let me ask you this. One of the biggest criticisms that people lay against me is that they call me a pedant, and I'm not. I basically just put out information that typically is found in the literature, and even the most diehard person against me that's educated will say, yes, well, Steve, yes, your information is correct, but, and then they'll try to, put some general colloquial, whatever usage. And I'm like, okay, whatever, if you understand the difference, big freaking deal. I think you're a hypocrite if you want to be, specific in science, but lackadaisical in philosophy. But that's your choice, right? I'm not going to say you're irrational. I just think it's a little bit hypocritical, because if you're going to hold to some rigor for yourself, you should have rigor across the board. Now, as it looks to the theist, now let's say you have a theist that is educated in philosophy. They know Aquinas, they know these arguments. They understand these arguments. Now, not every atheist is competent enough to out-argue them. I had a guy just like yesterday talking about Thomism. Okay, luckily I know a little about Thomism, but that's not the average person's thing, where an atheist is going to be able to understand the terminology of a Thomist, right? And so when I'm telling these atheists, look at, a theist is going to see you making these absolutely idiotically, philosophically unsound, irrational, dumb statements. What do you think they're going to think? Do you think they're going to say, I want to be like that person? I'm going to leave my faith for this deity that I believe gives me all this knowledge to be like that person? No, it just doesn't happen. And so I really want to get atheists to raise the level of their game. And I know that most people that are following me nowadays are wanting that as well. I know Brian here thinks that way. I know Jim Majors, CEO of Atheist Republic, thinks that way. I know Lawrence from Milwaukee Atheist thinks that way. There is a growing movement. And I want to see that movement grow as much as possible. And I think you're in the exact same position on that you want the atheist to understand that philosophy is the tool that you would use to have these discussions with theism. Because with theists, when I hear somebody say, well, atheism just means that in philosophy, but in general thing, I'm like, it's like you're saying, well, evolution just means that in biology. But when we have these conversations about biology, it can mean anything you want. It can mean change. Theory can mean guess. Well, no, these words have usages in respect to these topics. And if you want to have your stipulative personal language, if you want to do Wittgenstein's argument about personal language argument and have your own meanings, because people do this all the time, I'm going to create something. We'll call it agnostic atheism. Nobody else is going to understand what these words mean, but I'm going to throw it out there. It has some kind of meaning to it. Okay, great. You can do that. I'm not saying you can't, but don't expect me to go, that person's making sense. They're just not. It's epistemically non-viable. It's nonsensical in many ways. And so all I want to get to the message out there is that people have options. They can understand the material, which is difficult, or they can choose not to. And they can take more of a lackadaisical approach. But to tell people that want to study these things, the people like Brian who comes in and listens to these conversations and they're up their game, that they're sheep or something because they're following somebody, on YouTube that happens to be putting out what I think is correct information. Because if I don't, I will get shit on by experts. Trust me. I have so many people that would be happy to go. You've
done well. You've got a good audience. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man, dude, they do. Trust me. They're like, hey, Steve, by the way, come here. You fucked up. I'm like, what do I do? Oh shit. So it happens, right? But it's usually minor, and I usually just correct it the next time. But yeah, I mean, people watch my stuff that know their shit. And so if I said anything egregious, then I know I'm going to be called out for it. So what do you think, though? I mean, do you think that the atheists are doing themselves a disservice by taking all these rhetorical approaches and all these lackadaisical approaches and all these YouTube atheists out there going, all you got to say is you don't believe the theist, and there's your conversation. No theist is going to convert because you say you don't believe them. They're not going to give a shit. Okay, it doesn't work that way.
I think it depends on what constructs you want to bring to this. I think the number of atheists that I see that would agree with the position that religion, organized religion, theism, would bring is quite possibly going to bring an end to the world. The number of atheists that would hold that position, or would tell me that they hold that position, is really quite high. If you really hold that position, if you really hold that position, then you have some responsibility to make a concerted effort to resist that, to fight against that. But anything worth doing is worth doing well, and anything worth doing isn't easy to do. It's not easy. Anybody can get on Twitter and just get into a fight with random people. Anybody can do it. And then when the fight gets hard and out of your league, bail.
They do. And that's what they do.
It's harder. And that's what a lot of them do. And it's a lot harder to, and listen, when I get out of my league, one of the things I really like to do is say, well, I'm the Nick Soutter who's got 3 books published. I'm not allowed to not know things. I'd better find a way to bail before this guy discovers I'm out of my territory. But really what I have to do is say, oh, you know what? I'm reaching out of my territory. Why don't you give me a little time if that's all right with you? And let me get back to you on this.
Nothing wrong with that.
This is an area I don't know.
Nothing wrong with that at all.
That is something that you learn over time. That's something. Well, but that's something you learn. That's not something that you're born knowing. What you sort of have beaten into you in school is you can't show weakness. You can't, or that is weakness. It isn't weakness.
That is not
that's
weakness.
Something that you learn over time is actually strength.
So what do you do when they tell you that? What do they do when they tell you, well, you clearly don't understand? I get that frequently. And it's so funny. The people that tell me that they don't understand it don't even know the basics. And so I'm like, so this is what I do. And I want to know what you kind of do. When somebody says, well, Steve, you don't understand. And I don't know the person, and I know they probably don't know shit about it. I'm like, what is it you don't think I understand here? I write a blog about these things. I've had thousands of videos. If I don't understand something, then please help me out, explain things to me. And I'll ask them a question. Can you explain this to me? Because I seem to understand this correctly. If I don't, I want to be corrected. And they won't even understand the question.
Yeah, I try very hard to avoid credentials. And the reason I try hard to avoid credentials is because if credentials do mean something, but if they meant as much as would like them to mean, then nobody would ever have a bad hire and nobody would ever get fired.
Yeah, no, I don't care about credentials. I want to care about understanding. If you've demonstrated you at least have a proficiency, you have an understanding. Who would in the right mind would say you don't understand something that's in your wheelhouse? It makes no sense to me. It's a conversation stopper.
So it depends on so many things. So it depends on who I'm talking to, how badly it is I want to convert them, because every person I'm talking to is taking away some time from talking to somebody else. Mm-hmm. So, if they're completely nuts and I've got no chance, usually I try to find a way to wish them a good day, which I genuinely mean. It's not hard to find a way to wish somebody well and move on. If it's somebody that for some reason I really want to try to find a way to talk to, the other thing is there are very few conversations, there were 2 Jehovah's Witnesses that I spent 2 or 3 weeks with on Twitter. You can find them on my timeline. That was some long conversations. And there are people who are sitting there going, how on earth do you, and these Jehovah's Witnesses blocked and were blocked. It ain't easy to not get blocked by a Jehovah's Witness, by the way, because yeah, 2 Jehovah's Witnesses, the entire 2 weeks each. And one of them, I finally tired of it. He hasn't blocked me. Oh my God, I have to tell this story. He came to my defense. I was getting into it with SJ, and we were talking about some interpretation of Scripture, and we were talking about Job on Scripture, and she ended up saying, well, Nick, we without God, why would we have any reason to be good? And there are a number of answers to this. And there are some answers that are very dismissive that people give. I actually recently just gave one, unfortunately, and I have to start getting back into the habit of really giving the good long answer. But you know, she's sitting there. You know, Nick, why do we have any reason to be good without God? And all of a sudden, this Jehovah's Witness that I've been going at it with for 2 weeks jumps in and says, "SJ, why on earth are you giving the devil's argument?" She's like, "What on earth are you talking about?" He's like, didn't you read Job? The devil says without God, human beings would, you know, be bad and sinners, and they would all curse God and wouldn't have any integrity. So God leaves, Satan has his way with him, and Job maintains his integrity. So you're making the devil's argument. It's just like, I like having Jehovah's Witnesses in my corner. It just comes out of nowhere. Just smacks her upside the head. I was like, okay, I don't necessarily agree with him. I re-looked at Job and I was like, that's an interesting interpretation. That's a Jehovah's Witness interpretation. But point being, actually, there's a spectacular point to that one. That was a 2-week conversation, and I realized that was not a wasted 2 weeks. That is actually, it wasn't even close to a wasted 2 weeks, because first of all, he was actually a really interesting guy. Second of all, I don't think he would tell you I got him thinking at all. I studied cults in high school. I studied cults my first 2 years in college, and there is a way to get people out of cults. It ain't easy. I forget the name of the guy whose book I read. He was in the Moonies and is one of the #1 cult deconversionists. But the biggie is to try to get them to reconnect with who they were and what they were interested in before they joined. And I intermittently got back into that. But he taught me a lot about a lot of different things. It was one of the most worthwhile encounters I've had in a while, actually. But long story short, even if I had no impact on the guy, I learned a lot. It's very hard not to have a worthwhile encounter on Twitter if you're really open-minded and engaging. So I think if you try to be as positive and upbeat as possible, as engaging as possible, when someone comes up to you and says, well, you're not understanding, you're not connecting, say to yourself, okay, and tell them, I want to, because I want to understand better. So what can we do to get it so that I am not necessarily agreeing with you, but at least understanding what it is that you see that I don't. And I try to approach it from that way if it's a conversation I want to stay in. But if it's somebody who has such a lack of knowledge, I've been having another conversation that's been very difficult. He's a very nice guy. He's one of the nicer guys I've been in, but the conversation started on some ambiogenesis, evolution can't be real because the chemistry doesn't support it. Yeah, and you know, it's sort of like, and then we got into kinds, and I'm sitting there going, what you don't realize is these are non sequiturs. So it's one of those, and here this gets back into, listen, there's a reason I study the Bible. It's not because I enjoy it. There are some things about religion I do enjoy studying, and I love studying the philosophy of it. I enjoyed Aquinas, actually. I love the 5 proofs, the Quince Vitae. I love that stuff. But
I have a book on Aquinas' metaphysics here, believe it or not. It's that thick. Yeah, it's ridiculous. I'm not even kidding.
Yeah, I know. I have to study I study the praeses of this stuff. Well, even here's the other thing, which is if you read the Prolegomenon, Kant's Prolegomenon, people sit there and say it's a great book. It's like, yeah, the reason it's the Prolegomenon, it's that thick. The actual work is like, but well, I don't have. At any rate, let's see, Aquinas. Okay, but here's the thing, and I tell this to a lot of people. What bugs me, and I tell this to theists, and I'm honest about it, most theists get their knowledge of evolution from Ken Ham, and this is genuinely flat out dishonest. You can't do that. Get your knowledge of evolution from an evolutionary biologist. Now, I don't get my knowledge of the Bible from atheists. I don't. And when an atheist tells me a story, and this gets back into another thing, I inherently, And I have the Codex has a whole bunch of memes. I put up at least 2 memes a day on my thread of the Codex. We have a whole bunch of memes. I make basically all of them myself. One of them is one of the reasons I've always been suspicious of a belief in God is because I love the belief so much. I am just so in love with the idea of living forever, of an immortal soul, getting to see my kids after. I am so suspicious of the idea because I like it so much. I am suspicious of the idea that I'm the smartest guy in the room because I like that idea so much. You should be suspicious of any idea that you really like. And you should be suspicious of feelings that you really like. And you should be suspicious of bullying. Feels good. It's one of those things. In general, we like to bully. Even if you've been bullied, usually you like to bully. You say you don't, you think you don't, to some extent you don't, and then you're playing a video game, and because it seems harmless, you end up maybe doing a little online bullying. Unfortunately, we do have some id instincts. Now, a lot of the atheists, well, no, and this isn't just atheist. I mean, everybody, engages in bullying behavior. But when the atheists are doing it, I think this is one of the things we're talking about, how it's extraordinarily counterproductive.
Well, they do it when they come across something they don't understand.
They do.
Like I say it quite frequently. When they don't understand something, they instantly go into defense mode. Like, for example, I'll give you an example. In matter of fact, go on the live chat now. And by the way, Brian, if you got something to add, jump on in, dude. Anytime. I know you're lurking there. All right, so here's the basic logic, and I know, and a couple of people don't seem to grasp this. In set theory, you have a universal set, and you have a set and a complement set. Anything that's not in the set is in the complementary set. That's just the way it is. If you're in set A and you're not in set A, then you're in the set of things that are not A. And then the set of not A and the set of A are part of the universal set. When it comes to things like P or not P, which is, by the way, wouldn't be P or not P because those are propositions. It is A or not A, because if you want to instantiate A with something, let's say we're going to instantiate A with theism, right? The concept of theism. So either something is a theist or it's not a theist. That's called a dichotomy. So if I'm not a theist, right, I fall under the not theist. So if I took 2 sets, the set of all things that are theist and the set of all things that are not theist, which would be everything that's not in this set, it is the complement to this set, then everything that exists that is not a theist is what? Brian, anybody? Not theist. It is not complicated. If you think that's wrong, I seriously have to question your understanding of basic logic. Now, Nicholas, am I totally fucked for thinking something that's so simple that I'm totally hosed that I don't understand something as basic as that? Because they're telling me that rocks don't fall under not theist. That rocks are not theist, therefore they are in the category of not theist. They're in that set. Now, one could make an argument for theological cognitivism, because theological cognitivism is an epistemic thing, which a theological cognitivists doesn't feel like those words even have meaning. So to them, they're not a theist or not theist, but that's why we don't shoehorn things into classical logic like that. Epistemology, the logic for that is very complicated beyond my ability, but that's why we don't want to pigeonhole things in classical logic. However, when it comes to basic set theory, Nick, do rocks fall into the category of not theist?
Sorry, I was writing something down. Basically, do rocks fall?
Since rocks are not theist, right? We have 2 categories, theist and not theist. If they don't fall into the category of theist, they're in the set of all things that are not theist, correct?
Not theist, yes, correct.
Yeah. Why is that so complicated for people to get? They say there's a category error. That is not a category error. Okay, a category error is when you have something like theological cognitivism, which is a non-cognitivist position, and you're trying to shoehorn that into atheism. Atheism is a cognitivist position. That means they think that the proposition is an actual proposition. You can't even get so far to say, I lack a belief, if you're a non-cognitivist, because that'd be written as not BP. I do not believe P. But if P is not even a proposition, then that makes no sense to say a theological cognitivist is an atheist. There are 2 different categories. That's like saying I'm a emotivist, but I'm also a moral realist. Well, no, emotivism is a moral non-cognitivist position, right? So it's weird. But I really have people telling me that it's a category.
Color 9. Yeah.
So do you agree that it is not a category error to say that rocks are in the category of not theist, just like plants are not theist?
No, it's not.
Yeah.
You're comparing apples and the color 9. Not you are. Anyone who says it's two separate things.
So I'm not wrong.
You are not wrong.
Yeah, and I haven't met a logician that said I was wrong. That's why if I find a person that knows logic that says I'm wrong, I'll bring them in right now, because I want them to explain how you can have A and not A, which is law of excluded middle, and then if you instantiate with that something, theist or not theist, you're saying, well, no, I can't stick anything in the non-theist. Everything that's not blue, right, is blue. Everything that's blue is not yellow, not red, not green, not up, not down. It's all that. So I don't know. It's really confusing to me that I have some people that really don't understand that.
Well, I actually very enjoyed. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to, because I haven't. It was really fun looking at your piece, and it was really fun responding to Dr. Carrier and
you like my blog
on that piece, and it was actually. I do, and I enjoyed. I haven't had as much time to go on it as I would like, but I thoroughly enjoyed replying to the thing between you and Dr. Carrier, and it was actually it's kind of funny that Dr. Carrier seems to have gone back to his previous position, because I'd written that thing and he seemed to agree, but I was agreeing with you, and I don't know. It's beyond me.
I'm sorry. I'm really bugged by this. I don't know where people get this idea. You have to have cognitive ability to be in the not category. You don't. You only have to have cognitive ability to be a theist. You don't need a cognitive ability to be not a theist. My cup is not a theist. Okay. My computer is not a theist. It has nothing to do with fucking cognitive ability.
It's an atheist.
It's not an
actually
atheist
it's an
either.
A cup.
It's an A cup.
Actually, it's an A cup. Well, no, hold it up.
That's because it's
hold up your cup. Yeah, it's an A cup.
I think Steve's more of a B cup.
Yeah, I'm a beta. Yeah, definitely.
Shots
hey,
fired.
I don't have man boobs.
Shots fired.
But anyways, I'll tell you what I'll standing offer. If anybody thinks I'm wrong on this, you find me a PhD or master's level of a logician that wants to come in and argue on your behalf, and I will bring you in that night or the first available opportunity. But I need somebody of credibility that understands these concepts, because I think that if somebody argues that a rock is not a theist, I don't think they understand the concepts properly. I want to have somebody that actually I can tell understands the concepts properly, and I will come in and tell me, oh yeah, rocks are not theist or not theist. No, they have to be one or the other. That's a dichotomy, with the exception, again, there are epistemic reasons why a theological cognitivist isn't, but that's only because they assert that there is nothing to be had there, right? And so the only way you can make it, you can shoehorn a theological cognitivist into the non-theist position, but as somebody puts it, you have to take a higher epistemic position to do so. The non-cognitivist is going to go, they're going to balk at that. They're going to say, no, we're not. But in reality, sure, from a higher epistemic standpoint, they are non-theist, right? Because they don't have a God belief. Does that make sense? Logic doesn't always represent reality. That's why there's different forms of logic out there, I think. I mean, doxastic logic is a much better indicator of beliefs than classical logic, right? Because I can write things in doxastic logic that doesn't make sense classically, like Moore's paradox. The peculiar reasoner doesn't make much sense from a classical logical point of view. It's that you can say, I believe it's raining, but I don't believe that I believe it's raining. That doesn't make sense in a classical point of view. But Moore's paradox is a very strange phenomenon, but that's because these are dealing with psychological things that you don't find by shoehorning this crap into this sense of a dichotomous relationship. And by the way, do you agree, Nick? By the way, I'm I'm on my soapbox here for a second. Do you agree? And again, I'm trying to get people to understand the differences here. Theist and not theist. That is a dichotomy, correct?
Yes.
Okay. P versus not P. That is a dichotomy. It's a tautology as well, because no matter any value for P or for F, you're going to have true when you have P or not P. So that's a dichotomy. I would say a tautology. In the final column, you're always going to have T. So TFT, FT, T. It's always going to be true. That is a definition of a tautology using truth tables. Now, atheism and theism, they're not considered dichotomous. They're not. They're considered what we call contradictories, meaning that if theism is true, if it is the ontological case that God exists, then atheism, which is the belief that gods do not exist, cannot be true. It is a false belief. One of them has to be true, one or the other. Either God exists or God doesn't exist. So the belief is either a true belief or it's a false belief. Both of them cannot be true. Both of them cannot be false. However, there are things called contraries. Contraries also, one is true, one is false, but they both can be false. For example, atheistic and theistic beliefs, Christianity and Islam, those are contraries, right? One could be true, the other could be false. They both can't be true at the same time, but they both can be false. And I want people to understand these concepts because there's a distinct difference between contraries, contradictories, and dichotomy. And what they try to do is make this false impression on people that theism is dichotomous with atheism, and that if you're not a theist, you must be an atheist. That is bullshit. It's absolutely fucking stupid. It's wrong. It's not how it is in philosophy. If you want to believe that for your little groups, be my guest. But you cannot tell a philosopher that when a philosopher holds to that, that they're wrong. It's like saying to a biologist, you're wrong for saying evolution has to do with the change of Rayleigh frequency. What's the difference? Using that analogy, Nick, what's the difference if I called into a show that's a creationist show, and I say, hey, look, no, evolution is a change of Rayleigh frequency in any given population of species from one generation to the next generation over time, and the host goes, no, that's not what evolution is. Evolution just means change. Or if I say, hey, theory is a well-substantiated body of a model that does explanatory power and predictions, and they say, no, theory just means guess. That's what I see from the atheist community. The same dumb shits going out there saying, oh, well, that's not what these words mean in our community. Okay, great. But I'm not in your community, and I'm relating to you what it is from a philosophical standpoint. I'm being told I'm wrong. So can you weigh in on that? I mean, and by the way, if you disagree, by all means, tell me. I'll kick you off.
Don't.
But no, I'm kidding. That's how we play here.
Oh, good to know. Well, good. I was looking for a good excuse to get off this.
Yeah, no shit. Why is anybody on here? Brian's just chilling, going, "What did I get myself into?" Hey, Brian.
I got to tell you, I don't want to sound like a sycophant, but I feel as if I should be paying you guys tuition.
Yeah, and by the way, people can't see John here. We got John P in here, by the way, too. John, you've learned a lot, I think, from watching these things, haven't you? I mean, you really have.
Well, I mean, going back to some of the things you guys were saying earlier, like Nick was talking about, not beating people over the head with it. And as I've stated before to either you or Kyle, I've gone through a bit of a change over the last several months listening to you and listening to non-sec. And I was one of those people in the past that would beat people over the head. And you mentioned that street epistemology, Anthony.
Magna Bosco.
Right. Yeah, thank you for saying that for me. I really love his approach because he's not beating people over the head. And what I like and what he does too is he's planting seeds. He's planting seeds in people's minds, and they might not come around till months later, but the seeds he plants in their head, and when it comes to the deconversion, the camp I fall into now is you make the arguments, you try and make as much sense as you can, and then you leave the deconversion up to them. You don't beat them over the head, as Nick was saying, because if you can plant that seed and give a person another way of looking at it, if they're going to come around, they're going to come around of their own volition.
Well, I want them to be able to check these things independently. For example, what I'm telling you right now about things falling into the not theist category is basically, like I said, complementary sets. It is you can describe it mathematically as U, A, complement A prime. And you can say that in set builder notation that for any element of X in set A that is not in the universal set of U is equal to A prime. That's how you would write it in set builder notation. So it'd be A prime equals X is an element of A that is not an element of U. This is how a complementary set works. You can go look this up. And I challenge you to go ask an actual logician, if something is not in the category of A, it has to be an A prime. That's just how a complement set works. It does not matter whether it has cognitive abilities. It doesn't matter anything about the fact that it does not have the property of the element that it's in the set on in. That's all that matters for a complement set. Now, I'm pretty goddamn sure I'm right on that. So
I'm going to try to dovetail this into two things, actually. This gets back, one of the things I had said earlier was, yeah, people had asked, how many, well, gee, Nick, how many people have you deconverted? And I can't measure the number in terms of, because it's about planting seeds. And if a person actually comes up to me and says, okay, I've reached the point, if somebody's reached the point where I say they've been deconverted, yeah, I was there for the last second of it, but there were 16 people down the line, and the rest of the time I'm one of those 16 people. But to answer so I think I forget. So I think that was what John was saying, and I think that's a really good point. The planting seeds. I like the way that was put. To get to what Steve was saying earlier about the terminology. So Steve's terminology on agnosticism is somewhat old-fashioned, but it is entirely accurate. I mean, it's exactly correct. It's the proper ontology of it. So it's not how it's commonly used in my experience. So I can understand why it causes a little. It causes people to do a double take. Well, one of the interesting things, and it actually dovetails into this topic beautifully, because so many atheists look at it, and I noticed that you've I think twice now used burden of evidence instead of burden of proof, which I think
it's
may
synonymous
cause
with me.
Well, it is, but I think it's going to cause less pushback. One of the things that you would always properly used was said a burden of evidence instead of the burden of evidence. And if atheists were listening properly and heard that you had used the indefinite article a instead of they might have pushed back less also. But just switching to saying,
well, they hear that word proof and they get triggered. By the way, your mic is low if you want to kick it up a little bit. But yeah, the burden of proof. And I was just on The Place the other day, which was NCG Studios with Dr. Jones, along with Ozzy and Stephen Hoyt, who's a very respectable, well-known layperson philosopher. He and I are both layperson philosophy people. But the one thing we all agree upon, there's a lot, actually we agree upon a lot of things, but we all agree that burden of justification, burden of evidence, and burden of proof in epistemology are indistinguishable from each other. Could you argue in law and legalese there's some differences? Yes, and I make that argument. But as far as epistemology, no, they're all the same thing. But you say burden of proof, and a person loses their minds in the atheist community because they've been told and indoctrinated atheists don't have a burden of proof. Atheists don't have a burden of proof unless you say gods don't exist. Then you have a burden of proof. Most of them agree with that. Not all. Some of them still think for some reason that doesn't have a burden of proof, bizarrely. But even with a lack of belief, even if you say I don't believe you, that comes with a burden of proof because you hold a belief that you don't believe. This is what's called a normal reasoner in dosastic logic. A normal reasoner will say, I believe that I believe P. Same thing for I believe that I don't believe P. This is and that belief is a second order belief, just like agnosticism is a second order belief on the proposition, right? The first order would be, I believe P is true. I believe P is false. Atheism and theism, right? Or theism and atheism. But if I don't take a position on it, there's three epistemic states: belief, disbelief, and suspension of judgment. If I suspend judgment on it and I just say, I don't take a position either way, I don't assign a truth value to this, I have a belief that I don't have justification for that. There's a belief there. It's a second order belief. And I think a lot of people have a hard time wrapping their head around that. But when they really look into the literature and they think about it, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. I mean, when I told, Dr. Malpass, my arguments and stuff like that, it wasn't even a big thing to him because he's been saying that for a long time. Yeah, agnosticism is a belief about a position. It's a belief of a belief, basically.
And Nick, I can tell you that Steve is responsible for me now realizing that as an atheist, I carry a burden of proof. I, in the past, would always be was one of those people that said, well, no, I just don't believe in God. I don't have the burden of proof. You have to prove to me God exists. And I now realize that you do have a burden of justification. And I was arguing with a theist in a chat the other day. His screen name's Atheism Kills or Atheist Kill or something like that. And he was arguing that with somebody, and I interjected and said, well, no, I'm an atheist, and I do have a burden of proof. And he didn't know how to take that. And he actually argued that no, trying to argue, no, beliefs carry no burden of proof. He actually
That's ridiculous. Oh, wait, is this guy named John something or other? Not you, but another John?
Well, no, his screen name was Atheism Kills.
Oh, okay. Because there's a guy in the communities. His name's John something or other, and he believes this. He says he can be a theist and he can believe that gods exist, but that's not a claim. That he has no burden of proof on that. I'm like,
is that Cleese?
Is
John Cleese?
No, I don't think that's not. No, John Cleese is that's Goddess Engineer. He's not.
I thought John Cleese was in Monty Python.
Yeah.
No, that's Gleason. You're thinking
Gleason.
of.
Yeah, whatever.
Yes.
They're all Glees. Yeah.
I know who you're talking about. I've seen you talk.
Yeah, that guy is just he's just wacko. But I mean, unless you're doing a self-assessment, again, we talked about this on the place the other day. If I say, look, I'm just giving you my opinion, I have a self-assessment of what my belief is. You know, I argued with actually Ozzy on this. This is one point where I think we had a little bit of separation, even though I don't think either one of us are wrong. These are just perspectives, right? As Stephen Hoyt pointed out, he loved the conversation because none of us were right or wrong. These are just positions as long as we're consistent with ourselves, right? This is like, for example, I can say that reality is external. You can say reality is internal. I have no way to validating either one, right? There is no right or wrong answer. It's your perspective on it, right?
Yeah. Hey, Steve, was this conversation recorded or was this just a
recorded
hangout? Okay.
Yeah, on NCC,
Sweet.
NCG Studios, not New Covenant Group. Yeah.
NGC Studios. Okay.
Yeah, but like Nick was saying, a lot of people have not been exposed to these things because they've been literally, I hate to say it, but lied to by the atheist community. When you go to atheist, what is it? American Atheist, they tell you, look, if you're not a theist, you're an atheist. There's no other options. Bullshit. I find that narrative to be disingenuous. I find that narrative to be a Machiavellian because it's the end justify the means approach. Now, if they were to say, look, in our uses of these terms, if you're not a theist, you're an atheist, to have more people under that umbrella of atheism, I have very little pushback to that. The only pushback I would have would be, I don't think that's an effective means, but that's not disingenuous. At least they're being honest about their approach. They're going from utility. I get that. But to tell people that you must be theist or atheist in any possible situation, that there is no ontological reality that exists, no possible world that exists where somebody can be anything but a theist or an atheist, you're just flat out wrong. Nick, Nick's thinking about this.
Well, I'm thinking about that because there are perspectives where I have not. Dawkins was asked once.
I can't stand his philosophy, by the way.
Dawkins?
I can't stand his philosophy. Yeah.
Oh, well, no, he's not a philosopher. But
he thinks he is.
Once. He thinks he is, and he did answer this one reasonably well. He gave the Hillary Clinton answer to this, which was hilarious because she got roasted alive for this, and it was the honest answer, but that'll often get you roasted alive. He was asked what his views were, and he said he was agnostic. And he was debating a minister, and the minister called him out on that and said, "You're a liar. You said in the past you were an atheist." He said, "Well, it really depends on who I'm talking to."
Yeah, no, this is what I can't stand about Dawkins. Dawkins will say there are no gods. I mean, he'll say they're all bullshit if you press him, I'm sure, right? I mean, he is.
Yeah, he said it before.
Yeah. So you cannot then default to the agnostic position.
No, but he was defaulting to a different agnostic position.
He was going to the epistemic principle.
Yeah, what he was calling agnostic there was insufficient evidence to believe in a God, therefore he didn't believe in any.
But that's his evidential agnosticism.
And he admitted that in what he said, and he explained it to that audience. He said, it depends on who I'm talking to. To some audiences, that's agnostic, and to other audiences, that's atheist. He said, I try to judge the audience. And he said, and sometimes to some audiences would take that as an atheist, and
yeah,
some
but see,
wouldn't.
I don't think that does anybody any good to kind of cater to your audience like that. I think that they may think so, but then you get the charge of being equivocating, because if you're going to equivocate agnosticism with weak atheism to actual atheism, there's a huge distinction to be made there. Now, granted, weak atheism and agnosticism, sure, they're logically the same, but he is a strong atheist. He believes there is no gods. There is no rationality in the world for him to ever default into agnosticism. For weak atheists,
I
okay.
haven't even considered that, because he really is on the Dawkins scale, as I recall. He's a 7.
Yeah. So
he?
I mean, well, at least a 6.9 probably.
How he could.
Yeah. So if
I don't know.
the point.
7, there's no way he could do. Yeah.
Yeah. It's exactly. I don't say this is a good argument, so this is arguendo. But if I was a weak atheist, or he was a weak atheist and said, look, I don't see enough evidence either way. I'm reserving judgment. I don't say gods exist. And I don't say gods don't exist. Then maybe he can make an argument. In one case, he's going to say he's an atheist to one group and an agnostic to another group. Okay, at least he'd be justified to do that. I don't like doing that because I think it confuses people. But you cannot say there are no gods and then go to another group and go, I'm agnostic. That's dishonest.
A 6.9 on his.
Right.
No, that's a fair point. Let's for a minute. I hadn't even considered that. You're right. Let's for a minute assume that he was closer to a 4 on the Dawkins scale. I think because I do alter my terminology to fit the audience I'm speaking with and what I believe they would understand, and I think that's usually a commonly accepted practice. And I find it effective. You can get into trouble with equivocation, and you can get into all sorts of trouble, but it's a commonly accepted practice, and I find it's usually reasonably effective. The other thing that I'm starting to get tired, and I'm starting to lose my train of thought. I don't remember if this is where I was going to try to dovetail it. Oh wow! What were we talking about a second ago? I'm sorry.
Blondes or brunettes, I think was the topic.
No.
No.
Talking about
Dawkins saying he's an atheist in one case.
Well, no. Right before that, well, I guess to get into
equivocation.
Oh no. So you had asked about. I do agree as to how you define agnosticism. I think you're completely correct. However, there are groups whereby I would hesitate to, and I forget what grounds I was going to use, because you had asked, and you had noted that I had paused and I was thinking, and because I had found one set example where I would consider, not that you were incorrect, but I would allow for an alternate interpretation where I would not offer pushback on an alternate interpretation. I would still argue you're correct, but if somebody else did an alternate interpretation, I'd say this is within an acceptable norm.
I don't mind that either. Look,
I wouldn't.
Yeah, if somebody says, "Hey, Steve, what you put out is correct philosophically speaking," but I choose to take this other label, and I do it because of normalization. I know Genetically Modified Skeptic does that. Sirs does that. By the way, Sirs has a video coming out tomorrow on this very topic. I've already watched it. He showed me.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a good video. It had minor stuff, but nothing that he was going to go back and really correct. He made some notes in the video description that he said. But other than that, he supports me 100%. He agrees that Steve's right. Stop telling Steve that he's wrong. Stop saying to people Steve's wrong about agnosticism, because when I say that Matt Dillahunty and those guys are wrong about this, I'm not saying that they're wrong about their personal use. What I'm saying is when they tell people that is not how it is in philosophy, or that you're wrong to use philosophical terminology, that's where I take umbrage. Huge difference.
And that's the key. And I think that's a critical distinction. And that is where I'm completely in agreement. And I think you're right. I think you're going to have a very hard time finding anyone who's versed on the topic who isn't in agreement. But that brings us back to, I hope, when we talk about evolution, when we talk about the Bible, when we talk about agnosticism or anything like that, we expect and hope that the people we're talking with have some form of expertise in the subject. And when they don't, and they start to criticize these ideas, whether they're theist or atheist, if you don't have sufficient background knowledge, it makes it hard to give you credibility in exercising these ideas, and to say that you're actually putting forth a rational argument.
Yeah, we do a lot, actually. Yeah, she does, actually. She's really good at that. Yeah. That's how we made money as kids. Yeah, that's that's kind of how we made ends meet, man.
So now for
gotta make a living, right? Who am I to judge?
We're talking about
at least it wasn't a porn bomb.
That was on a telephone.
I'm sorry.
Telephone, you can't.
What was that?
No, just
something you said a minute ago, Nick. Sometimes when you hope, you set yourself up for disappointment.
Sometimes when you what?
You said you hoped that people had a basic knowledge, and when you were talking about evolution and that with somebody, and I said sometimes when you hope, you set yourself up for disappointment.
Well, I mean, I get at disappointed all the time. I mean, people that I respected, I still think that they're just utterly wrong. Like, for example, like the whole rock thing. It's like, dude, duck or not duck. I'm not a duck. I fall into the category of not duck. Okay. I don't have to be a bird to fall into the category of not duck. There's no goddamn category error there. Star or not star. I fall into the category of not star, quark or not quark. I fall into the category of not quark. These are not complicated things.
But if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck.
By the way, thank you for the super chat. I can't pronounce your name, RJ. I don't. It's in Chinese, but I had a super chat, so thank you for that. Go ahead. My apologies.
Well, hopefully this is where we can sit here and expect of ourselves and try to expect of our tribe and our community that we try to bring a higher level. So when we talk about when we're talking to ourselves and each other, people like Steve, and when people attack Steve and they say, well, he is this or he is not this, we say, well, how well do you understand this issue? And this gets back even to essentially what we started with. Well, you don't want to imagine a God. Why not? Why is it that you feel like you can't bring yourself to do
what
this?
Do you mean by God? What do you mean by God?
Imagine whatever God you want to. Why can't what? How about can you for a minute imagine a God that you would want to exist? Any God that you would actually want to exist?
Well, I'll tell you sorry. I was just going to say the God I would want to exist is the God that Christians pretend that they worship, because they talk about this omnibenevolent being,
and that's fine. I got no issue with that. I think those are valid criticisms people can talk about. Let's talk about
the best answer I've ever.
Yeah. Exactly, John.
It's the one they see. It's actually the one they see when they look. I was thinking about this earlier because I used to be a theist, and I was thinking about this because somebody was asking. We were talking about after deconverting before when somebody was talking about they want to. I'm setting myself up to do a polygraph and or a brain scan to see whether or not I truly believe in God, because there's this guy who thinks that all atheists actually believe in God and whatever. So I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do a debate, presumably. And there was a study done, and atheists were triggered when they said things like, I dare God to, strike me down or strike my family down. And he said, this is proof that they actually believe in God. And I said, listen, there are a lot of reasons why atheists might get triggered like this, not the least of which is you're conditioned in this society to be triggered like that. And listen, I can take a gun, I can check the chamber, make sure there are no bullets in it. I can pull out the magazine, make sure the clip is empty, put it back in. And if somebody aims that thing in my head, I'm going to be triggered. It doesn't matter that I've checked it, and it doesn't matter that I quote, no, it's empty. You're going to have a biological response to it. And I said, there's a operant conditioning. If you believed for 20 or 30 years that God could and would strike you down for blasphemy, you will never undo that operant response. And he made fun of me for a little while for it, and asked how long would it take for me to overcome my operant conditioning of Santa Claus, a few other things. But then it occurred to me, I was talking about, John McCain being tortured and how long did it take for him to overcome that. And I realized, yeah, when I was a theist, I really looked at the Bible and I looked at everything I believed and I said, it's all amazing. It's all wonderful. It's all lollipops and roses and it's gorgeous. And I wouldn't change this for anything. And then afterwards, I was looking at it like I was being tortured 24/7. It was all, and it's the same set of circumstances. But by the time I was out of it, I felt like I was a VC, like I was freed from the VC prison, and I'm equating it to John McCain. And I'm like, wow, what's it take to have?
See, when I was a theist, I never had any of that. Granted, I mean, I'm Mormon, but I mean, I never got into the whole, I have to like worry about hellfire kind of stuff, or I never went into like converting people. Never was an issue of mine. So I never really had that mentality.
I never tried to. Well, actually, I was trying to convert people, but yes.
No, I just going to say, I mean, going off what you were saying, you can't say that theists, you can't say that Christians are delusional because they have a belief in God, because, beliefs.
Yeah, that bugs me.
Not, yeah. But what you can say they're delusional about is the image of their God. Because if you actually read the Bible, the God that they claim to believe in is not the one that's described in the Bible.
Well, that's not a delusion. That's just, again, a false belief. Now, a delusion would be like, for example, I say that I believe that I've had this angel come down and tell me to kill my first five children or something, or my firstborn or whatever. Yeah, I'm going to think that you need some mental health issues. You need to go checked out, right? But if somebody just has a false belief, they say, yeah, I believe this God has these properties. Okay, well, they just could have false.
Well, it's almost a delusion in that. And how's my mic, by the way? It appears to be registering quiet here.
That sounds good.
Yeah, it's good now.
Okay, so it's almost a delusion in that there's a text that seems to read very clearly one way, and they interpret very much another. And there's a number of reasons to interpret it. I understand how they dovetail one into another. You can get around a lot of the slavery, the endorsement of rape, all this other stuff. There are ways around a lot of that. The New Covenant theology gets you around a lot of that, but it's still very difficult to reconcile the God that Christians really seem to see when they look at that book, and the God.
Well, there's two versions of it. The Old and the New Testament seem to be a different deity.
Well, it's yes and no. I mean, presumably it's the same God.
It doesn't seem to be, though.
Well,
no, it doesn't.
Not a jot or a tittle.
Well, I get
having
that,
a son
but they
really seemed to
describe
mellow him out.
What's that, Nick?
No, I said, well, yeah, having a son really seemed to mellow God out a bit. But you
got some 14-year-old ass.
Yeah.
Wait, was that Islam?
Yeah.
No, that's Christianity.
Mary was 14.
Mary.
Oh, Mary. Okay, yeah, that's right.
So, well, here's the thing. The original covenant with Moses, God said he would not make another covenant. Now, presumably there was a second covenant, or actually, I guess it would be the third. It's been a while. The third covenant was then made, Jesus made with man, and that covenant allows you to ignore most of the Old Testament. So that's how you get rid of the ban against crustaceans, the ban against tattoos, all that other stuff. So now we can party and do all sorts of stuff. We can't do slaves, but we can do tattoos, clothing of multiple threads, and all that other good stuff.
But I don't understand it. I was a Christian for many, many years. And the way I interpret it is, Jesus said, I have come not to change the law, but to fulfill it. And, not a jot or a tittle shall pass. I mean, so.
Right. But that doesn't mean that the guys described us, they sound completely different, John, from the Old and the New. They just seem to be described. It's like people are describing an entirely different being.
Well, right. But I'm talking about how you said about the new covenant. That's what and then the other thing is you throw out the laws that you're talking about, but then somehow the 10 Commandments still stand. So,
yeah.
Well, so the, okay. So Yes, I've come to fulfill it. Once he dies, they're fulfilled, and then you've got the new covenant. And now, new covenant actually was, if I recall, I want to say it was Paul who first said that Jesus had the new covenant. Jesus never actually talked about a new covenant. It was Paul. I can look it up. I've got it. I think it was Paul. I've got it written down. So Paul was the one that said with Jesus, all the old laws would be gone. It would be a completely new covenant with man. But Jesus had to die for that new covenant. So the old laws would have to be fulfilled first. Jesus dies, boom. Now you've got a new covenant upon his death.
Oh, okay.
So that's the first one. Then what was the other question you had?
Well, I mean, that basically addressed. I mean, it wasn't really a question.
I'm gonna.
It's two different gods.
Yeah, it sounds like a different god. I'm gonna jump topics real quick. I know Nick's probably fading quick, so we're not gonna keep this too much open. He's got to get his beauty rest. Or
this gray beard doesn't stay gray all by itself.
Dude, it's meticulous. I'm envy. So you can drop either time. I don't think that you have to stay. I'm not going to get upset. I don't know how.
I'm enjoying it. I will probably go at the point at which I start babbling. And
you're already there. Yeah, you've been there since.
Yeah, I was going to say nobody will.
When you said hi, my name is Nick when you first got here.
Nobody will tell. Nobody could tell.
I got to have you more. I got to have you on more. But trust me. So.
I'd love to.
Brian, go ahead, and then I'm going to jump topics real quick.
Yeah, that's fine. Are you on Facebook at all?
I am. I don't do Facebook all that often. I'm usually check my Facebook like every week or two, but I am on Facebook, Nicholas Lamar Soutter, and I'm on Twitter.
Okay, so you're mostly active on Twitter then?
Mostly on Twitter, but you know what? My Facebook notifications do appear on my screen, so if you hit me up there, I should see you.
Okay, so great.
Hey, I just want to real quick put a pin in something before you change the conversation too.
Mm-hmm.
You were talking about, hey, the atheists that say, hey, you're either a theist or you're an atheist, and they don't want to accept that there's an agnostic.
They won't debate me on that. They'll get their ass handed to them.
And here's the thing: the reason I find that to be harmful too is that the agnostic position is kind of a safe space for some believers. Okay, because of the stigma, because of the stigma that's attached to atheism and the bloviating, illogical atheists that you guys talked about earlier. There's a lot of non-believers that don't want to take that atheist label, and I think that agnostic position gives them a safe space to transition.
I've argued the same thing, John. Exactly the same thing. Matter of fact, if your goal is to deconvert, you want to give somebody to not be a theist any longer, does it really matter if they're a weak atheist that they're calling themselves an atheist or agnostic when it's still not theism?
Non-believer.
Still non-believer. So, I mean, what's your goal? Yeah, Nick.
I'm going to do you even one more, and here's the other one, which breaks my heart every time. What about deists? There are so many deists who are anti-theist.
Yeah, but that would be non-classical.
I'm sorry, what?
The difference is that in classical theism, deists would fall under not theists. It would actually fall under atheism under that schema, right? But then you're talking about a totally different schema with different axioms. Right, you'd be like not even talking about reals anymore, like mathematics. You'd be talking about like Galois theory or something. So in non-classical, deists fall under theist.
But in terms of practical application, people who have deistic beliefs, and there's also the sort of British version. I always get into arguments with people because there's also the British have a different way of defining deism. Where, let's see, deism is actually a subset of theism, and it gets to be really annoying. But deists, in terms of those who have, so Buddhists, anybody who believes in a higher power but leaves it at that. Okay, so let's just define deism as people who have some kind of higher power belief, but it's not a personal God. It is not a God who issues injunctions and commandments, or even if they do, they're not ones that necessarily you would have to impose on other people. In general, if there's any injunctions or commandments, you have to impose them on other people. There's a reason for that. But so let's just say it's a higher power of some kind, leave it at that. That's a deist. If there are so many deists that are anti-theist in one way or another, they don't like Catholics, Christians of any kind, other religions coming around trying to convert them. They are willing to help atheists in an anti-theistic movement but they get turned off when atheists sit there and say, no, you believe in a prime mover. You think a prime mover is necessary. You're just as bad as a
Yeah,
theist.
I see it. There's a difference there. By the way, I don't care. Yeah, exactly. To me, is what is again? This goes back to the goals. People know that my channel has always been dedicated to a couple of different things. These are personal biases I have. I'm fine admitting that. I am against young Earth creationism. I think it's one of the biggest bullshit scams out there. I can disprove it 6 ways to fucking Sunday. I've done it for years. It's like the old flat Earth. Now flat Earth is the new thing that's been coming up there. But we all know flat Earth's bullshit. So I'm against that as well. So, but my goal is to get people away from that crap. I don't care if they stop being theists. It's not relevant to me. Somebody else will take that up if that's their agenda. But I still will put out information that shows why young Earth creation is wrong. Just like I'll put out information to show that people that are using this philosophy that they have in their own little communities is not how it is in actual philosophy. So I don't see a difference there. For the deists, though, look, if somebody wants to believe there's like an aesthetic God that created the universe and then walked away, just to, hey, this is beautiful, like a painter. Okay, I think it's a unfalsifiable thing, but I'm not against somebody believing that. It doesn't affect me in any way. It doesn't affect the school system. It doesn't affect creationism being taught to my daughter. I don't care. I just have no dog in that fight. Do you see the point, though? That it really depends on what your goals are. So my goal is just to get people not to teach bad shit.
But that's sort of my point. So when an atheist,
so they're an ally to me, by the way. Deists would be.
But that's my point. I think they're an ally to what most atheists say they are for.
Yeah.
So when an atheist says, hey, I don't like religion because it opposes global warming, it opposes vaccines, the religious education tends to oppose these things. When people say this is why I oppose religion, because it opposes, ostensibly, it opposes education on some level, deists in general do not oppose these things. It's theists that do. So ostensibly, the deist is on your side, but the number of atheists that I have found that would aggressively attack a deist who is ostensibly on their side is staggering. And why? That I can find, it's a dogmatic reason. So if we're sitting here talking about, again, the dogma of an atheist, I've gotten into so many discussions, and I've seen discussions where an atheist is engaging a theist, and then a deist will come in attempting to aid the atheist, and then the atheist will turn around and attack the deist.
Yeah, that's a silly. And again, tribalism. I mean, you want to pick your allies. That's why I got a lot of theists that I know that are allies in my fight, right? I mean, General Han Solo, Cy Gart. I even say that I would go so far to say SJ in some ways would be an ally because she's against young Earth creationism. At least it seems like she is. Yeah, I don't really care what your beliefs are in that regard. I want to know how you're going to help me fight against bad information. Now, again, people can argue, well, theism isn't true. Okay, that's your dog. That's your fight. I don't have a dog in that, so I really don't care.
I don't know how much this relates to that, but something I thought of while you guys were talking is, and I've blown people away by saying this, I don't rule out creationism. And because the reason, what I mean by that is, we could have been created, but it wouldn't have had to be a god. It could have just been a superior, more technologically advanced race.
Yeah, I don't know what would be the difference, though. I mean, if a technologically advanced
race, from our perspective, it wouldn't be different because we wouldn't be able to distinguish between that much technology and a god. But it doesn't have to be a deity,
Yeah.
We could be a jar of sea monkeys on some alien show.
That was Brian Shrimp, by the way. I want to put a shout out real quick to Dr. Jones and New Covenant Group Studios. By the way, he's watching. Had a great time on his channel the other day. I already shouted out to him earlier in this stream that I was on that channel. Had a great time with Ozzy and Stephen Hoyt talking about speech act theory and just our views. And again, it was kind of fun to talk about these topics from people that have a different perspective that I have very high esteem for. Because I don't think it's one of those things that is right or wrong. I think that these are just your personal viewpoints. And if you're coherent and consistent on it, I'm okay with that. I'm not going to judge somebody because they happen to have a different philosophical position than I do. They could be a realist. I could be an anti-realist. They could be an idealist. I can be a realist. They can be a modal ontological realist. I can be a modal ontological anti-realist. It doesn't matter. These are positions, right? There's no way for me to determine what's right or wrong. I just want to have consistency. But I do want to jump real quick because Willie Mays, who's the youngest creationist, is in the live chat. And he said something that I see a lot of people say, even though I've corrected on him numerous times. And I don't know why this narrative keeps on being persistent. Objective morality is not normative. Objective morality is a meta-ethical position. It is a cognitivist meta-ethical position. Just because you don't accept objective morality, which, by the way, I'm fine with, if you have a framework with arbitrary and subjective axioms, and you want to make an objective moral framework from that, like Sam Harris does, based upon harms and benefits. I think Wittgenstein uses compassion or empathy. Knock yourself out. No issue. I'm just happen to tend to more to error theory, which is more nihilism, which would be Mackey's view. But that's just a personal meta-ethical position. He just says that he thinks that all propositions dealing with morality have instantiation issues. Because there's no actual physical property that we can instantiate something like stealing is wrong with. Wrongness, what is that? It doesn't exist in any kind of existential form. So when we say something like, my cup is green, well, now it's translucent, but there's a property there, universal. So people can talk about, well, does that property actually exist? Okay, there's not even a property to be discussed of wrongness, so you can't instantiate that proposition to be true or false. It's considered to be untrue or just an error. That's error theory. Now, again, personal, I'm not married to it. I don't care. I can go to objective morality just as easy, but it has nothing to do with normative. That means, what do you do, or what you ought to do given a situation to be moral? If you're at your job, nobody else is around, some, money laying on the counter, nobody's going to know if you take it or not. What's the ethical thing to do? Right? That's normative, what you do, whether you're appeal to consequentialism, utilitarianism, virtue ethics. That has nothing to do with objective morality. So when a theist says to an atheist, oh, well, if you don't have objective morality, how can you know what's right or wrong? You're already starting from a bad position. Now, Nick, would you agree with that? Or do we part ways on that? Because that's one thing that drives me nuts, when people use objective morality to try to make it normative.
For the most part, yes, although you are starting to get beyond the last time I
Just
studied
agree with me, and
meta-ethics.
that's all you need. That's all you need.
I agree.
Okay.
The last time I studied meta-ethics, AJ Ayer was the guy.
Oh, he's been dead a while.
Yeah, no, he was cutting edge. He was cutting edge when I studied.
When did he die? It wasn't that long ago.
I don't know when he died, but he was cutting edge when I'm a Kantian, as you know. So it was, for the most part, it was, okay, look, it's essentially moral
89.
if, oh my God.
Yeah, you were old.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Nick,
you know,
you should be.
I do read
just
Ayer,
gonna say
though. I do read him. So.
You should be careful. You should be careful automatically agreeing with Steve, because you're going to get accused of being a member of the cult.
Yeah, axiomatically, that just a member of the cult of Steve.
Listen, of all the things I get accused of on a reasonably regular basis, that would probably be the least I have to worry about.
You're a Kantian. How was it hanging out with Kant?
Oh, he actually, I am so thankful to say he was just slightly before my time.
Oh, okay.
But no, what is it? So his ethics was essentially, if you're only really in trouble if the whole society tries to reproduce your act. If it all goes to shit, then they're all in trouble.
I'm not a Kantian, and the reason I'm not one thing I disagree with Kantians vehemently about is that a Kantian ethics would put forth for a categorical imperative that something like you can never lie, right? It's always wrong to lie. And Kant has these arguments as to why that's the case. I don't subscribe to that. I think there are sometimes, as a virtue ethicist person, that it's okay to lie. I think that there's a happy medium between two vices: being overly honest, brute honesty, and being a liar. I think there's a median there, a golden mean that would be called just honesty. And so in virtue ethics, that the virtue is between two vices. that's why I would not subscribe to Kantian ethics, that you have this categorical imperative. Now, I'm not saying that there cannot be categorical imperatives. I think it's hard to make that leap between the is-ought thing. Except, yeah, well, you could do it for hypothetical syllogisms.
Well,
but
and no, I mean the obvious answer too is, Nazi knocks on your door and says, "Do you have Jews up in your attic?"
The paradigmatic example. Yeah. Well, I mean, but do you agree with Kant on that?
No, I do. No, I do not agree with Kant on that. But you see, here's the thing. So it depends on how you want to define Kant's example on that. Because so the next answer is, well, hold on. If what I say is, well, I would lie, but here's the reason I would lie is because society would function just fine if every time you're trying to save an innocent life, you do lie, society functions just fine. So it's instead of the category being always lying or always telling the truth, it's I lie only to Gestapo officers. Now that's a finer grain than Kant necessarily allowed for, but that's a perfectly acceptable one. That one has a problem, which is as soon as you say that, well, here's what the Gestapo is going to say. Well, I have a Kantian here who is going to lie to me no matter what, so I'm just going to come in through the door every single time and check the attic.
Yeah, why bother asking?
Okay. Right? Yeah, exactly. But having said that, that's not necessarily a rational reason to object that as a meta-ethical proposition. You still have, I still like the Kantian. I don't, let me put it to you this way. I don't live my life necessarily by that Kantian method, but I do on a reasonably regular basis say to myself, hey, listen, what would happen if everybody did this? What would, the problem with the Kantian, the fundamental problem with, I think Kant's preposition would work perfectly if, and this is the problem with most of these, with most meta-ethical propositions, it would work perfectly if there was a way to define the terms consistently and reliably, but you can't, because what I've just done works beautifully. Hey, lying, telling the truth all the time doesn't work. So let's say that just lying to evil members of the Gestapo, lying to criminals, lying to my 8th grade math teacher when I don't have my homework assignment, those things are acceptable, and all other times.
What about lying to women at a bar?
And lying to women at a bar. Thank you. I forgot that one. So
that's how Allie and I met, by the way.
Yeah.
And you could build a society that functions beautifully with all of those exceptions, but the problem is, if you have to micromanage every single one of those exceptions, you don't actually have an ethical system anymore, because you're actually having to ask the question each and every time, as opposed to having a meta-ethical system. And if
I totally agree with that. Yeah,
the system doesn't exist anymore. There's no, it's all of a sudden it's I'm getting tired, so I'm losing the. But you understand what I'm saying. All of it.
You're taking a reductionist approach. Yeah, you no longer have a meta. Yeah, you don't have a meta-ethical viewpoint at that point. The other defeater, well, the way Kant would defeat, they would say, well, let's say you tell them that you don't have Jews there, and the Jews are actually hear you, and they run outside, and the Gestapo actually sees them and kills them. Are you then accountable for their death because you lied? That the way a Kantian would look at that. Now, again, I don't subscribe to that narrative. But anyways, I just wanted to point out to Willie, don't sit there and say that atheists, because by the way, a lot of atheists do have morality. It's a normative, it's a meta-ethical position, not a normative, that they can't make right or wrong decisions. There's nothing wrong with that. I can appeal to a normative ethical position and say, this is wrong. You don't do this because of consequentialism, if you want, or if you really want utilitarianism, or even maybe contractualism, if you read Scallion, which is a very difficult read, by the way. But yeah, I just wanted to get that out there. So anyways, I know it's getting really late. I got to cut down my volume a little bit, because I'm going to get yelled at probably here. But
may I make one really quick observation?
Yeah, yes, please.
It's been, I keep being told that you can't make right or wrong decisions if you're an atheist, and there are all sorts of counters to that. But I'll make one observation on the other side, which is there are 3,000 mutually exclusive sects of Christianity. There's actually 55,000 sects of Christianity, but there's 3,000 mutually exclusive sects of Christianity. They all disagree on what's permissible, what's right, what's wrong, so on and so forth. And that's not including the 2,000-year history of Christianity. All of these people have disagreed on whether murder is right. You know, some of them have said murder in Jesus's name is right. So if God is God has a position on what's right or wrong, he is not talking in such a way that people can agree, in such a way that anybody can agree. Nobody's ever agreed at all on Christianity, and you can't tell me I'm wrong on that.
No,
you cannot tell me I'm wrong on that.
God is the worst metric for objective morality possible.
So if there is such a thing of objective morality on God, there is zero evidence of it. Nobody has been able to reach it. Nobody has connected with it. Nobody has it that they can demonstrate. And if they can't demonstrate it, it's not there. You can't reach it if it's there. So if there is objective morality with God, the theist has it no more than the atheist at all. Never has. And I don't see how they ever can or will or claim it.
I totally agree.
I've been making the argument for the longest time that unbeknownst to them, Christians actually borrow their morality from secular values, because there's no way they can be getting their morality from the Bible. I mean,
and the thing is that it goes to epistemology of how we know things, right? How is it that you know what this divine being has for moral framework? You cannot know the mind of God. If God existed and it was an infinite being, he has to have a way to convey to you information in a way that you're not going to fuck it up if you want to have an objective moral framework. Now, granted, there are some very simple moral frameworks that people can go by, or even objective facts. If I want to play chess with Nicholas here, then we can have an objective standard. We can read the rules and we both understand how the rules work, because we can look at the chess pieces and go, yeah, the bishop goes this way, makes sense. Knight goes this way, makes sense. There's not going to be that much ambiguity between how him and I play chess. And if I decide to play chess with Allie, if she reads it and goes, yes, a bishop goes, 5 spaces this way, 1 over this way, 1 up that way, then I'll be like, Allie, you're not reading this right.
Hell yeah.
I don't know what game you're playing, but you're not playing chess.
If she beats you, I think she's playing it right, but that's all right.
Yeah, how much vodka have you had to play that game of chess?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I agree with you, Nick, that it's just like you can't really say that this God is this arbitrator of morality, because, by the way, really in the live chat, you may not know this, but you can go look this up. Divine command theory falls under ethical subjectivism, because God can change his mind at any time. So it's not even an objective framework by invoking God, believe it or not. Common misconception in philosophy. Now, there are some people that do argue that it is objective, ethical objectivism, but they do so from a very, I don't buy it, their argument, because if God can change his mind, then it's ethical subjectivism.
Ooh, I may disagree with you on that one, but that's another time.
You think it's an objective moral framework, divine command theory? You don't go too deep, but
I want to hear this.
Only because I'm wondering how I'm going to explain this. Only because
how about I explain it this way and you tell me you agree? If God comes up with the axioms for which moral framework is predicated on, the grounding, to us it's objective. Is that something you would argue then?
I'm not entirely sure. I'm actually trying to figure out if I can figure out a way to put this into an analogy that's reasonably close to your argument for agnosticism, to suggest that he can be completely removed from any discussion of morality at all. But I think I'm probably beyond the ability to draw on that.
Think about it, but I will tell you, divine command theory generally does fall under ethical subjectivism.
I'm sure it does, and it probably is rightly so. I'm actually a fan of divine command theory, and if I was a theist, I'd certainly buy it.
I'm not against. I actually ever heard of ideal observer theory?
Sounds
Check
familiar,
that one out.
but
Yeah, ideal observer theory, you don't need divine command theory. It's just basically what would be an agent from an outside epistemic viewpoint, how a perfect agent would do something. It has some validity, but again, these are all weird, nuanced subjects, right? I mean, when it comes to like morality, that's one of the most difficult concepts in philosophy, next to things like possible world semantics. That's complicated stuff. But morality, wow. What I think is, and then we're going to end this, that the conversation of morality has been so bogged down with people and their own interpretation of these words. And I don't think there's even a distinction to be made any longer. Morality is subjective and is subjective. It depends on what you want to do with it. There is no real distinction anymore to me. It's like the analytical and synthetic distinction, like Quine argues, doesn't really exist. I agree. These are all just whatever. I don't care what your I don't care what your meta ethical position is. I don't give a shit if you think a proposition is a moral fact or not, or if it relates something that is subjective or objective. Doesn't matter to me. All I want to know is, what are you going to do normatively in a situation of ethical concern as a moral agent? I want to know if you're a good person. That's it. And you don't need a God to do that, Willie. I'm telling you right now. Nothing about being moral is contingent upon a divine being existing or not existing. It just doesn't. And morals come from your family. They come from your school. They come from your parents. They come from
environmental.
Environmental. They come from evolution.
And if you need a God to tell you may not be good in the first place, would be another interesting argument.
I don't want to trigger Steve, but I kind of like Matt Dillahunty's explanation of why we have morality.
No, I agree with Matt Dillahunty on that, by the way.
Based on well-being.
That's right.
And the fact that we have the ability to empathize, and that we're social creatures.
Yeah, but that's not Matt's argument. Matt stole that from Wittgenstein and Sam Harris.
Wow.
But no,
so Brian, that didn't quite work. Could you try to trigger him again? It almost worked.
You got to pull a little harder.
I agree with Dillahunty. Dillahunty will argue, he says this: as long as we all get together and we all agree upon these things as society, we can build an objective framework from that, because that's what he means by objective. And I don't have a problem with that. I'm cool with that.
I get everyone on the same page, though. That's very difficult to do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, we don't have to differ on everything. I just differ on Matt and Arn's narrative that you have to be theist or atheist. That's only applicable if you make certain axiomatic conditions that they have. I don't have those axioms in my framework, neither does philosophy. So that's all. But anyways, let's wrap this up because it is getting late. Ali, did you want to add anything? I know you came in late, but
no, I didn't want to interrupt. You guys had really cool and interesting things to say. I didn't know it was appropriate. I didn't want to interrupt, so I waited for most of it to be said with. So I didn't want to be rude.
Interrupt.
This is the first time I've encountered Nick, and
it's great, Amy.
Me either.
I want to thank both him and Steve for letting me take part, because I'll tell you what, I could have sat here and just listened to you and Steve talk the whole time. And
I have hidden jewels, man. I got people that you guys don't really know, unless he was on non-sex, so people might, but I got a lot of people that are very fascinating people to talk to, and I talked to a few of them off air and stuff like that. I've need to get them on air, but
you gotta get them back on. I
know a lot of people, and I'm going to be bringing them on to the show
anytime. My pleasure.
This is just technically it's not a show, but
and it's also nice to not always be debating, also having someone similar on a similar page and just having a conversation. You don't need to be arguing back and forth. It's nice to see people just having a conversation. I like that.
Whether Nick agrees or disagrees, we know the difference is, if you know the topic, you don't have to agree or disagree as long as you understand the person, what they're saying.
Yes,
there's nothing he said tonight I don't understand, and I don't think there's anything I said that he doesn't understand, because we have an understand the topic. Him much more than me, because he's a philosopher, but I'm not inept in this topic, as some people want to make people believe. That's kind of bugging me. I didn't spend 5 years learning this shit to have these types of conversations for some fucktard that has never read a paper to tell me that I don't have an understanding of these things. You're
also not cocky enough to take on the position without knowing it. You would say, I don't know this,
I'm happy to do that.
Fine. Yeah.
That's how I learned some of this stuff, by saying I don't know, and people are like, oh, let me explain it to you. Oh.
And that's very honest. And that's why people like you, because if you don't know, you're just gonna say, I don't know, but teach me so I do know for the future. You're not gonna sit here and hold a position that you can't technically hold, you don't know, or pretend to know.
Right.
And that's great. A lot of people do that.
I'm not ashamed to admit it. You said that you and Nick understood each other. There was a shit ton you guys said that I didn't understand.
No, did you watch Non Sequitur tonight? Do you have any idea how many people were lost in that conversation with JF?
Oh yeah,
and
I saw that. I saw the end of that.
Holy cow, that was a deep stuff, and I dug deep to for that conversation. And by the way,
Steve,
sorry.
Yeah, Steve, could you please link to the hangout you were in with Ozzy and Malpass? I tried searching for it, nothing was coming up. So
yeah,
whenever.
Yeah, and I'll do that right now. And then Nick, why don't you give us last word here so I can find this and you can tell people where you get your book and read your stuff. And man, it was awesome having you on. I mean, I've been trying.
Thank you. My pleasure. Anytime here or non-sec, I would love to come back. I am on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. Book is on Amazon.com, and The Water Thief, Confessions of a Sin Eater, and also the Humanist Codex. Actually, it's the atheistcodex.com, but really that's about it. I really enjoyed being here, so thank you for having me on. And
I love this stuff. So you don't even know how much it means to me to be able to have a conversation with people on these levels, because, and again, this is not me raising myself up. People always put this narrative out there. Steve Smug. Steve's
no. I don't really hear that actually.
I hear it there so often, but the thing is I'm sorry, but if you're a dumb fuck who won't even bother to go read something, why am I going to waste my time with you? That's it. That's all I give a shit about, is if you just at least will go look into the topic. That's all I'm asking for. I don't think that's asking for too much.
If they won't waste their own time, why should you waste your time?
I don't expect a physicist who's like Lawrence Krauss. He's going to be on the show on the 26th. I don't expect him, to go out of way to talk to a guy that says, "Oh, well, I'm not going to read a book on physics," but you're totally wrong about fucking metastable false vacuums. He's going to look at you like, okay. So, but anyways, Brian, you didn't get anything. You want to say anything before we go here? And by the way, I put the link into the video description for you. But anything else you want to add besides that?
Awesome. No, this is a great conversation, and I look forward to further conversations like this, especially with the philosophers. I'm really trying to get into this topic. I'm working at a machine shop for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and very little time to read. So
you do work a lot.
This is
yeah. No, and I'm glad. And I'm glad
this is perfect. If I can get it in audio format, it is very much easier.
I'll leave you guys with this. I know Lawrence, I know Jim Majors, CEO of Atheist Republic, and I know Cyrus the Skeptic. I know there's a lot of people that are agreeing with me and that want to raise the bar. I know Nick wants to raise the bar, and guess what? They're all atheist. This has nothing to do with theists. I've had people accuse me of saying, "Oh, you just have influenced by theism." No.
Oh, come on. No.
That
You're a theist apologist.
Yeah, I've heard that. And so no, this is about rationality, and this is taking a higher ground. And if your goal is to deconvert people, I'm sorry to tell you, but taking this, I just lack a belief, and I just don't believe you, you're not doing a very good job convincing theists to of anything. Okay. So I'm hoping people take this newer approach and get away from that old narrative that the Atheist Experience and American Atheists has put out. Granted, I get a lot of crap for it. You don't even know the vitriol from people that just come to my channel and say, "Steve, you're an idiot." Okay, but why?
Steve, do I get to agree with you and call you an idiot anyway?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, please do. Yes, of course. This is why I'm going to kick you right now. So it just blows me away that people want to dumb people down. I'm telling to give them information, just like a biologist. I'm not a philosopher, but even if it's biology, if I tell you something about biology, you can go validate it. If I tell you about the electron transport chain, which I knew a little bit about because I did videos on it, you can go validate it with an actual biologist, right? But if somebody just says, "Oh, well, Steve, that's not what complex 2 does in the electron transport chain." Okay, well, why? Oh, because reasons. Well, no, you need
a holy book.
You need to tell me. If you don't know what complex 5 is, you don't know what an ATP synthase is. If you don't understand what the topic is, how the hell are you going to tell me I'm wrong? But
they're just disagreeing for the sake of disagreeing at that point.
They do. They really do. But anyways, Nick is asleep. He looks like he's ready to pass out. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you for the live chat. And remember, rocks are not theists. Trust me. Jesus.